Have you ever wondered how many people go missing around the world in a single day? How about in a whole year? We dug up these chilling statistics and just imagine, every day, 607 people vanish without a trace. In 1 year, that adds up to 221,644 missing individuals. Over the past 20 years, the number reaches a staggering 4,432,880 people. That's more than the entire population of New Zealand, or nearly the entire population of Ireland. Think about that for a moment. Almost 4.5 million people from each generation simply disappear. But how is it that, in this age of digital information, people can still vanish? Here's the answer. Some deliberately choose not to be found, while others are kidnapped to fuel the black market for organ trafficking, sex slavery, or for illegal medical experiments. And then there are those twisted individuals who take people simply to fulfill their own vile goals. But sometimes the missing are found, and they become another tragic headline. On October 24, 2019, 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard was reported missing by the Auburn, Alabama Police Department. Her parents and relatives launched a massive search campaign, and within days, local authorities joined the effort. Could it be that this young college student's disappearance was just a dramatic teenage stunt? That maybe she'd simply partied too hard or gotten upset with her parents like so many teens do? That kind of behavior might be possible for any other teenager, but not for Aniah Blanchard. Aniah Haley Blanchard was born on June 22, 2000, to Elijah Blanchard and Angela Haley Harris. The family lived in Homewood, Alabama. Her father was a businessman, and her mother was a registered nurse. When Aniah was about 3 years old, her parents split up but maintained a friendly relationship. In 2003, her mother, Angela, met heavyweight MMA fighter Walt Harris, and soon, the two got married. Despite her parents' divorce when she was still a little girl, Aniah had a great relationship with both of them. Over the years, she became a part of 2 different families, finding love and support from her stepmother, Yashiba Blanchard, and her stepdad, UFC fighter Walt Harris. These 2 couples and her older brother, Elijah Blanchard Jr., who was just 17 months her senior, meant the world to her. From a young age, Aniah had a strong maternal instinct, something she picked up from watching her mother work. Aniah's kindness made those around her feel loved and at peace, and she was always ready to listen and lend a helping hand when someone was in need. At 19, Aniah Haley Blanchard was the glue that held her family together, bringing them happiness and strength. Aniah graduated from Homewood High School, where she had a real passion for playing softball. In 2019, she enrolled at Southern Union State Community College, SUSCC, to study early childhood education. Her dream was to eventually transfer to Auburn University and become an elementary school teacher. On October 23, 2019, Aniah and her brother went to visit their mom and stepdad. After dinner, they said their goodbyes and headed back toward the college dorms. Around 11 p.m., Aniah dropped her brother off at his place and continued on her way alone. They lived just 10 minutes apart. She let him know that her phone battery was running low, but assured him there was no need to worry since she didn't have far to drive. Later that night, around midnight, Aniah called a friend. But after that, Aniah never made it back to her dorm. The next day, her family reported 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard as missing to the police. One of the biggest red flags that something was seriously wrong was that Aniah had left her dog Blue alone overnight. Her mom knew Aniah would never do that. That dog was like a child to her. Aniah's phone activity ended at 11:47 p.m., suggesting that her phone either died or was turned off around that time. It last pinged near the Clarion Inn area on South College Street. A massive search effort began. Her parents appeared on TV shows, volunteers posted missing person flyers, and search groups combed the areas around where she was last seen, and all that effort paid off. On October 25th, about 50 miles from where Aniah disappeared, her 2017 Honda CR-V was found in a Montgomery apartment complex. When police inspected the car, they discovered that the interior was covered in blood, and there were serious dents and damages to the exterior, consistent with a collision. According to law enforcement, the damage occurred sometime between Wednesday and Friday night. Days went by, but there was still no sign of Aniah. Her parents were devastated. They continued making appearances on television, desperately trying to keep Aniah's story in the public eye, hoping it would lead to more clues about her whereabouts. A week after she was reported missing, 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard was still officially classified as a missing person. She was last seen wearing a black dress and brown boots while driving her black Honda CR-V. In an effort to get more people involved and help bring Aniah home, a $105,000 reward was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. But despite the reward, the search for Aniah didn't pick up speed. There were almost no solid leads, or if there were, they weren't being followed up on properly. Let's try to piece together the sequence of events and pay attention to any details that law enforcement might have missed. On Wednesday, October 23rd, just before midnight, Aniah Blanchard was on the phone with a friend. This was the last time anyone who knew her heard her voice. By Thursday, October 24th, a missing person report had been filed with the Auburn Police Department. "We need as many people as possible searching for Aniah right now. This is not like her. She would have come home," said Angela Haley Harris, Aniah's mother. Late Thursday night, her stepfather, UFC heavyweight fighter Walt Harris, posted a video on social media pleading with the public to help find his stepdaughter. But as the days went by, hope began to fade, and her family and friends were left clinging to the hope that she would return. On October 25th, after Aniah's car was found with blood inside, her parents were overcome with despair. On Sunday, October 27th, a vigil was held for the missing teenager who, according to her mother, had been with a man on the night she disappeared. The young man she had just met, that's all. She didn't say where she met him, how she met him, or where they went. She just said she was with this guy she'd just met, but my daughter wouldn't just go off with a complete stranger, Haley Harris explained. On Monday, October 28th, the police released surveillance footage showing Aniah entering a convenience store around 11:21 p.m. to buy some potato chips. By October 30th, a task force had been assembled, made up of more than 60 agencies, including the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. The disappearance of Aniah Blanchard triggered a massive search operation. The multi-agency task force, which included the FB1, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, was actively involved in the search. The case quickly gained national media attention. The only real lead the police had was Aniah's damaged car, which was abandoned near an apartment complex in Montgomery. The car showed signs of a collision, and blood was found on the front passenger seat. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences confirmed that the blood belonged to Aniah Blanchard, indicating she might have suffered a life-threatening injury. Investigators also discovered a bullet hole in the passenger door and shell casings in the left cup holder. Police noted a strong smell of cleaning solution in the car. Despite this, there were still no suspects or solid leads pointing investigators in the right direction. As time passed, detectives had no choice but to dig deeper into the existing evidence. When detectives took a closer look at the surveillance footage from the convenience store where Aniah was last seen, they noticed a black man lingering near her. On November 6th, the Auburn Police Department released an image from surveillance footage showing a man who could be of interest in the investigation. Detectives identified the man and were waiting to speak with him. The individual was described as a black man between 20 and 30 years old, weighing around 200 pounds, and standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. He was last seen wearing dark pants, dark shoes, and a camo hoodie with the word Vans printed in white on the back. Police reported that the suspect left the area in a silver or gray Lincoln Town car from the early 2000s. The next day, The man was identified as 29-year-old Ibrahim Yazid from Montgomery. Surveillance footage confirmed that he had been in the store at the same time as Aniah. The video shows him buying alcohol while persistently looking over at Aniah. He was later caught on camera exiting Aniah Blanchard's car from the passenger side. Footage from another gas station showed him getting back into her car on the passenger side again. Afterward, Aniah and Ibrahim drove away together. But if the bullet hole was in the passenger seat, why was the blood Aniah's? Eyewitness accounts confirmed that on that night, Aniah Blanchard and Ibrahim Yazid were seen talking near her car by the store. One witness claimed she saw Ibrahim force Aniah into the car before driving off in her vehicle. According to detectives, this witness shared what she saw with a friend, but neither of them intervened to help the stranger. By all accounts, Ibrahim forcibly put Aniah in the passenger seat. At the time of Aniah Blanchard's disappearance, Ibrahim Yazid already had a long criminal record and was out on a $295,000 bond, facing charges of marijuana possession, robbery, and attempted murder. By age 30, Ibrahim had accumulated almost every crime in the book, including violent offenses, except for an actual homicide. The suspect was also accused of attempting to kill 2 police officers in 2012 when he rammed into their car and was arrested in 2017 for aggravated assault on a police officer. He had a history of assaulting officers with weapons, dealing synthetic drugs, and participating in robberies. In one escape attempt, he even crashed into a police car. Yet, shockingly, the court kept releasing this repeat offender on bail, or giving him minimal punishment. In June 2020, Ibrahim Yazid was charged with the 2018 murder of Stephen Hamby. He was also charged with the attempted murder of a woman who was shot in the face during the same incident that killed Stephen Hamby. Somehow, despite all of this, he was still walking free. Auburn Police Chief Paul Register stated, "Further investigation and analysis of the evidence determined that Yazid was at the same location where Aniah Blanchard was last seen, and he was involved in abducting Aniah against her will. There's no reason to believe that Ibrahim knew Aniah. She may have just been a random target of a carjacking." Officials didn't rule out more arrests and continued searching for any accomplices of the suspect. An arrest warrant was issued for 30-year-old Ibrahim Yazid, who was wanted on first-degree kidnapping charges and had a history of arrests for violent crimes. Authorities actively searching for Yazid warned that the man from Montgomery might be armed and dangerous. On November 7th, police issued an arrest warrant for Ibrahim Yazid on first-degree kidnapping charges. After the warrant was issued, authorities spent about 12 hours looking for him. This happened 2 days after the surveillance footage of the man believed to be Yazid was released. A tip led police to Pensacola, where the Florida Regional Fugitive Task Force tracked him down near an interstate exit. At around 2:30 a.m., Yazid was taken into custody at the Escambia County Jail in Florida on kidnapping charges and later agreed to be extradited back to Alabama. He was denied bail since he was considered a fugitive wanted in another state. Aniah Blanchard's family feared that her warm, bubbly nature might have put her in a dangerous situation, and her willingness to help others led her right into the hands of criminals. "She's just someone who lifts everyone's spirits and brings happiness. She's so full of life. It pains me to say this, but maybe that's what got her into this situation. She was so trusting, and I think someone might have taken advantage of that," her mother said in yet another interview. The family also dismissed rumors that Aniah had plans to meet up with some guy the night she disappeared, stating they went through her social media accounts and confirmed that Aniah hadn't been talking to anyone other than her family and her roommate. One of the last messages Aniah sent was a Snapchat to her roommate saying she was with a guy she had just met. But Haley Harris didn't believe Aniah wrote that message because the wording and style didn't sound like her daughter at all. She chose not to share further details about that message. As investigators suspected, Ibrahim had accomplices who helped cover up the carjacking and were with him the night Aniah went missing. The investigation hit another dead end until police arrested a second suspect, Antwine "Squirmy" Fisher, on November 22nd. Later, a prosecutor revealed that Fisher had helped Yazid switch to another car and provided him with money when he fled to Florida. Before detectives could fully question Fisher, the kidnapping case had turned into a crime. On November 23rd, police arrested a third suspect, David Johnson Jr., and charged him with hindering prosecution. Charges against Fisher and Johnson were eventually dropped. Lee County District Attorney Brandon Hughes declined to say how Johnson was obstructing the prosecution. A gag order on the case prevents attorneys, prosecutors, and witnesses from talking to the media about the details. According to Fisher, Ibrahim Yazid arrived at David Johnson Sr.'s house on October 24, 2019, sometime between 5 and 6 a.m. Fisher claimed he saw Aniah Blanchard's car parked near some bushes at that time. Yazid allegedly told Fisher he needed more gas for the stolen vehicle. Fisher drove Yazid to a gas station where they filled up a can with gasoline before returning to Johnson's house. Yazid reportedly told Fisher he needed to grab something, so Fisher drove him north on Interstate 85 toward Shorter. Fisher said they stopped in Montgomery, where Yazid picked up what he needed, an assault rifle. Afterward, they drove to a cemetery off I-85. There, Fisher claimed he saw Yazid dragging something that looked like two legs wrapped in a blanket. Yazid supposedly spent some time in the woods before coming back to the car. By the end of November, hope of finding Aniah alive had all but disappeared. On November 25th, police came across discarded human remains. They were discovered in Macon County, in a wooded area off County Road. Investigators found a skull with what appeared to be a bullet hole in the top. Alongside the remains, they found clothing that matched what Aniah Blanchard was last seen wearing, as well as a lead projectile. On November 27th, the remains were officially identified as those of Aniah Blanchard. An autopsy revealed that she had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. As a result, the charges against Yazid were upgraded from first-degree kidnapping to capital murder. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, one for committing the crime inside a vehicle with a deadly weapon while the victim was in the vehicle, and another for committing murder during a first-degree kidnapping. The preliminary hearing was delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but the public and Aniah's family patiently awaited the harshest penalty for the man who took their beloved daughter from them. Yazid, accused of kidnapping 19-year-old Aniah Blanchard, appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on November 20th. Yazid's attorney, Elijah Beaver, filed a motion requesting a hearing, simply stating that his client was entitled to a preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charges since, according to him, Yazid didn't kill her, but only resisted when Aniah pulled out a weapon. The next hearing took place in June, where Auburn Police Detective Josh Mixon testified about the case. Defense attorneys challenged the prosecution's claim that the crime was committed in Lee County. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Russell Bush found probable cause to present the case to the Lee County grand jury. According to court records, Aniah Blanchard fought back against the criminals who tried to steal her car. She knew how to handle a firearm and could defend herself, but the experienced criminal was quicker than the young woman. It's worth noting that on March 6, 2023, Ibrahim Yazid still hadn't entered a guilty plea to any of the charges against him, so he remains in custody without bail as he awaits trial, which has been postponed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other legal reasons. However, without bail or a direct dismissal of the case, 34-year-old Ibrahim Yazid will stay in the Lee County Sheriff's Office jail until his final conviction or acquittal. Aniah Blanchard's disappearance and death drew nationwide attention and media coverage. Her death led to the creation of Aniah's Law, which reformed Alabama's bail laws as her accused killer, Ibrahim Yazid, was out on bail when Aniah was killed. The Alabama state constitution guarantees the right to bail for all defendants, except those charged with capital offenses. Yazid had been released on bail after being charged with kidnapping and attempted murder, which are not capital offenses. Aniah's law expands the exceptions to include other serious crimes like arson, burglary, domestic violence, aggravated child abuse, assault, robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, rape, sexual torture, terrorism, and homicide. Prosecutors will be allowed to request a bail hearing, which the judge can either grant or deny. If the hearing is held, the defendant will be allowed to testify, present witnesses, and cross-examine witnesses. Prosecutors will need to demonstrate that the defendant is a flight risk or a danger to public safety. The judge can then either approve or deny bail. As of November 8, 2022, Aniah's law, House Bill 81, was passed by Alabama voters. A scholarship in memory of Aniah Blanchard was established by the Homewood City Schools. In June 2020, a bench in Patriot Park in Homewood was dedicated to her. A horrifying tale of a woman's revenge. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge, cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years, but if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbitt spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many try to sidestep. Let's delve into everything step by step. Who is Lorena Bobbitt? Lorena Leonore Bobbitt, born Gallo, was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucay, located in eastern Guayas, Ecuador, near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-oriented. In her teenage years, she lost her father, and her relationship with her mother, Elvia Gallo, was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her paternal cousin, Yana Basutti. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Yana's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the U.S. as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Basutti owned her own beauty salon located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. Meeting John Bobbitt. About 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous, as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment so late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup, and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere inside. The venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her, and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbitt, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments, so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. Who is John Bobbitt? John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo, in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness, in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall, he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service, with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments. But he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. A whirlwind romance and a modest wedding. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbitt was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict Yana, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena, and she accepted. She was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them. And so the fairy tale ends. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's sharp remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that John was to blame since she had called him to the table several times, but he was too engrossed in the TV. In response, he slapped her, and she retaliated in kind. Lorena had always believed that she could stand up for herself and would not let herself be mistreated. But the longer she lived with this man, the more he dominated her, suppressing her will, feelings, and determination to stand up to him. John established his own rules in their home, and he treated his wife as nothing more than an object, constantly criticizing her, physically abusing her, and coercing intimacy, even when she was unwilling. Failed motherhood. The young wife naively believed that if they had a child together, her husband would soften and stop his cruel behavior. However, as it turned out, John had no desire to have children. Therefore, when Lorena informed him of her pregnancy in 1992, he became incredibly angry. He demanded that she get an abortion immediately, and they never revisited the subject. Lorena procrastinated for several weeks, hoping her husband would change his mind, but he remained adamant and continued to pressure her to comply. Eventually, he literally forced her to go to the hospital and terminate the pregnancy, which was a tremendous shock to her and took a long time to recover from. In reality, John simply wanted to live for pleasure, unburdened by anything. He did not have a steady job, making ends meet by working as a bouncer in entertainment venues, and if he needed money, he would unashamedly take it from his wife, who worked as a manicurist and highly sought-after makeup artist in a beauty salon. The last straw. Lorena tried not to tell anyone about what was happening at home and not to complain, but her friends and colleagues began to notice changes in her behavior. From a joyful, smiling girl, she turned into a quiet, haunted shadow of her former self. Those around her suspected that all was not well in her family, but they had no idea how serious it was. Her husband's behavior became increasingly controlling. He closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lorena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone, as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 a.m, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down, but then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard, and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage, and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend, who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbitt was. Precision surgery. Throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, slowing the blood loss significantly. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention, The question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it, reattaching it to its original place with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice, and urgently transported to the hospital where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon who arrived from the state capital was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before, but he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time, which lasted more than 9 hours and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. Public outcry. That same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbitt also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations, which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything, and if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses. 2 parallel court cases began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night, although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence, and humiliations she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her will under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income, yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty in the fall of that year. Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her spouse. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus, he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt, Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively, but over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas, and by his 50s, he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life, during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbitt had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought to trial for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did not take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elvia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lorena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News' The Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show. In the mid-2000s, Lorena remarried. Her new husband was a man named Dave Blanchard, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bobbitt at all and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. A meeting 15 years later. In 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face for the first time on the show Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his words and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, Her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. The dark mystery of the disappearance is solved 14 years later. Investigating certain crimes can take years or even decades due to a lack of evidence or witnesses. Sometimes investigations are intentionally misled to create confusion or send investigators down the wrong path. Many such cases eventually end up on the shelves of archives as unresolved. However, crimes involving life-ending actions and abuses of various degrees of severity generally have no statute of limitations, and investigations can be reopened at any time when new information surfaces. Cases related to the disappearance of individuals, particularly minors, are often solved on hot tracks. It is believed that the first 3 days are critical when there is a high likelihood of finding the person alive. Thereafter, the chances of a favorable outcome rapidly diminish. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Kruger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. The girl disappeared during the day on her way home from school, having traveled just a few dozen meters from her home. No evidence, leads, or witnesses were found, and although the investigation was periodically reopened, there was little hope of solving the crime. However, thanks to meticulous work by undercover agents, the criminal was eventually exposed. What is known about Georgina Kruger and her family? Georgina, or simply Gina Kruger, was born on April 11, 1992, in Munich, and was the middle child of 3 in a simple family. She grew up with her older brother Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and her younger sister Michelle, who was 2.5 years her junior. When Gina turned 11, her parents decided to separate, and her older brother, who was then 19, chose to live with their father. After the divorce, the girls were primarily raised by their mother Vesma and their grandmother on their mother's side. Both girls did well in school, were involved in music and dance, and were creative by nature. The family lived modestly, and while their father maintained contact with his ex-wife and daughters, he was more focused on supporting his elder son, whom he funded through school and supported in various ways. In June 2006, Vesna moved with her mother and daughters to Berlin, where she had been offered a well-paying job. The family settled in the Moabit district at house number 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st, the sisters attended one of the best local schools, which, although located in a different district, was accessible by bus. Vesna was very pleased with her new job and had big plans for the future, but soon the peaceful and measured life of the family was shattered. She dreamed of becoming an actress. From childhood, Gina loved to sing and dance, engaging in these activities seriously and with full dedication. Inspired by Indian films, she dreamed of an acting career and enthusiastically participated in school theater, as well as attending acting and stage speech courses. Teachers working with young Kruger noted that she definitely possessed the necessary talents, and thus predicted her future success and fame. Moreover, the girl had a bright, expressive appearance, a slender feminine figure, and was quite tall for her age. She took meticulous care of herself, keeping up with fashion trends, striving to dress stylishly, and used decorative cosmetics skillfully and intelligently. It's worth noting that Georgina applied makeup as well as professional makeup artists, often doing makeup for her friends and neighbors back in Munich. In Berlin, during the summer holidays, she actively attended various castings, trying to break into the big screen or television. She managed to appear in crowd scenes a few times, but these were very inconspicuous episodes. However, on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, luck finally smiled at her. She auditioned for a guest role in the television series, Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. Gina was supposed to receive a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast, discuss details, and invite her to sign a contract. The new beauty in town. In her new school, the young beauty caused a real stir from the first day, capturing the attention of all the boys in her class. However, she struggled to get along with the girls as they openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. Her classmates were slow to accept her into their group and communicated with her reluctantly, although Gina was sociable, friendly, and open, avoided conflicts, and tried to interact with all the kids in the class. The teenage girl was indeed very beautiful, danced well, sang, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to try herself as a photo model. She agreed, but unfortunately, she never made it to the planned photo session in early October. Gina dreamed that one day she would make it to Hollywood or Bollywood, where she would act in movies. She imagined herself on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals, among celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, film awards, and was ready to work hard on herself to achieve her desires. The schoolgirl almost made it happen, when suddenly she disappeared without a trace, a few miles from home. So the schoolgirl was awaiting confirmation of her role in the TV series, and she had no doubts about it. All weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the upcoming call from the studio, which was set to decide her fate. She was excited and inspired, already imagining herself on set and working on her lines. On Monday, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school in the morning. She was supposed to return home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and since the call was expected in the late afternoon, Gina asked her grandmother to answer all calls, promising not to linger anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly for Kruger. Her classmates noticed that she seemed tense, constantly checking the time, and unable to focus on her lessons. Since she hadn't told anyone about her participation in the casting, her anxious state was interpreted differently by everyone. When school ended, Georgina, having gathered her belongings, hurried to the nearest bus stop, got on bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed home. After traveling 3 stops, she got off at Rue Rettenover, which was a short distance from her house. However, she never made it home, vanishing somewhere halfway from the stop to her apartment. Georgina Kruger was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. Search for the missing schoolgirl. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the grandmother, who was waiting for the granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was supposed to return first, and Michelle a bit later, since she had additional classes at the music school that day. But the older granddaughter did not show up, which was very strange because she was eagerly awaiting the call and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, the grandmother grew anxious and started calling Gina to find out where she had vanished, but the schoolgirl's phone was turned off. Subsequent attempts to reach her also failed. The anxiety grew, and when Vesna returned from work and learned that her daughter was missing and her mobile was unreachable, she realized something serious had happened. The first thing the mother did was call the school, where she was informed that Kruger had attended all her classes and had left by bus as usual. Then the woman contacted several of her daughter's friends, hoping that the girls had simply got caught up talking or had stopped at the cafe on their way home, but they said that Georgina was in a hurry and had headed straight home. The concerned women then went to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. However, the law enforcement initially took a skeptical view, suspecting that the schoolgirl might have gone on a date, visited someone among friends, or had an argument with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere in a park. After exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager was nowhere to be found in any of the anticipated locations, detectives began checking reports of accidents and calling hospitals, assuming that the girl might have encountered trouble, suffered an injury, or been harmed on her way home from school. But Gina had not been admitted to any hospital either. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. It turned out that the girl was last seen at the bus stop when she exited the bus and turned onto the street leading to her home. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Kruger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect the scent of living or deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Vanished into thin air. Law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, spoke with workers at local stores and cafes, but no one had seen Georgina, and even dogs could not pick up her trail. By the next morning, Flyers with the schoolgirl's photos and requests for any information about her had been posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station reporting sightings of a similar-looking girl in different parts of the city, but unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Concurrently, investigators began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those who had been released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals and those who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings were found, as if she had never existed at all. False lead. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended as there were no leads, not a single clue, and no idea which direction to pursue. However, about a year after Georgina's disappearance, an anonymous call came into the police station, with the unknown caller claiming that the girl's body rested at the bottom of a nearby lake. Authorities were unable to identify the caller, but they clung to this piece of information and decided to investigate it. For several weeks, highly skilled divers combed the lake bed using advanced equipment. It can be said with certainty that they examined virtually every inch, but found no trace of Kruger. The lead turned out to be false, but it nevertheless rekindled public interest in the case. The media actively discussed and wrote about the missing girl again, so it was decided to conduct another search operation. The police re-interviewed neighbors and brought in search dogs, although it was clear that this would likely yield no results. The dogs had been unable to pick up the girl's scent on the day of her disappearance, so there was little hope for success after a whole year. Investigators were confident that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Kruger family members refused to believe this. Vesna concocted a legend for herself, according to which her daughter had run away to India and was now starring in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her younger daughter. The monster next door. Search efforts periodically resumed, and in 2016, nearly a decade after a girl's disappearance, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police to complain about a neighbor who was actively inviting underage girls over to his place. This neighbor turned out to be a 35-year-old immigrant from Turkey named Ali K. He was legally married, raising 3 children, and tried to appear as an exemplary family man to those around him, but in reality, he was not. Upon closer inspection of Ali, and after studying his personality, the police were horrified, as 4 years prior, he had already been under investigation. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl, promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building, struck her on the head, and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, then gave her a paper napkin to wipe her tears, and helped her tidy up before leaving. The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together, and when the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing, and he, trying to reason with her, pushed her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body, but the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven as the man had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife, Melek, fully supported her husband and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, the man only received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, now as the police took up the investigation of the disappearance of Kruger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Ali K did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts, was a regular visitor to the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he made acquaintances with different people who treated him to food and drinks. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, ask them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali most resembled the role of Georgina's abductor, but the police had nothing against him in this case. New investigation. Nevertheless, the Kruger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K. was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It turned out that 10 years ago, he had been questioned along with other neighbors, and his basement had been inspected. But specifically, Ali's storage room had not been checked because, firstly, there was no reason to, and secondly, according to residents, the door always had a lock, so only the owner could access it. Ali himself had been an active participant in the search operation at that time and was one of its most engaged members. Despite the fact that the police had nothing concrete to charge Kay with, they decided to keep him under surveillance to learn as much as possible about him. Unofficial monitoring was organized, and all his phone calls were intercepted. Soon, this provided initial results, and detectives discovered that the man had significant debts unknown to his wife. He had lost about 10,000 euros in poker and had no idea how to get out of this predicament. The investigation decided to focus on this aspect. Undercover agents. The decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans and details with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned that they needed to find a manager soon, noting that it was a well-paying position and it was important to choose wisely. After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee, when suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table. He took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role, then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly, and their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect, as the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer. He boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the story, whose goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Malek, and try to uncover any secrets the husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them to get along, after which all four started socializing as families. Malek was a sociable woman, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and was convinced that her husband was a very good person, just unlucky with jobs. But now everything would change. Soon, Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Kruger case and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Malek knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. Good cop, bad cop. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The Kay family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children, but no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Moreover, maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and signed a sham employment contract with the man to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step by introducing another agent who would play a villainous role. According to the backstory, his name was Kaur. He was Hakan's cousin, had a criminal record, and was running some underground business. It was hoped that Ali, meeting a kindred spirit, would open up and confess his sins. The men quickly bonded over their shared interests. Kaur treated his new friend to drinks, and together they visited various clubs and houses of ill repute. The new friend confessed that he made money through not entirely legal means, and thus wanted to spend it indulgently, with Ali willingly helping him in this. Simultaneously, Kaur constantly complained about his girlfriend, with whom he supposedly could not break up because she was blackmailing him and threatening to report his illegal business to the police. According to him, she constantly demanded money, and her appetites were growing. One day, while having drinks with his friend, Kaur declared that he intended to rid himself of the bothersome blackmailing girlfriend in a radical way and was willing to pay a sum of 100,000 euros to anyone who would do the dirty work. Ali perked up at this and offered to take on the task himself. His friend agreed, but suggested they discuss the details in a secluded place when sober. Monstrous confession. In November 2017, sitting in the agent's car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Kaur doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken a life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot, and he burned with desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl, who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. But no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Kaur's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste of the landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict. The hearings in this case lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered to the criminal. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Kaur's trust. But in reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No other evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession. However, his detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of this man's guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgina's disappearance, Ali K was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of ever being released. His wife, Melek, never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. The streets were dark and mostly empty. A young woman hurried out the door of her house, leashed her dog, and quickly got behind the wheel of the parked car. The car sped up and disappeared into the city's darkness. For the young runaway, it was the happiest night she had waited for 4 long years. Today, we will visit Lawrence, Kansas, and learn all about the life of this young woman and understand what made that particular night the happiest one for her. So if you're interested in finding out more about what happened, let's start from the beginning and share everything we know. Lawrence is a small town with a population of less than 100,000 people, ranked among the top 10 college towns. It's a wonderful place to live with minimal criminal activity. However, this incident completely disrupted the town's peace. On January 15, 2014, a young man contacted the local police department to report a disturbing, suspicious noise at his neighbor's house. Officers were dispatched to the address provided. However, no one answered the door, and the house was empty. They surveyed the surrounding area, and through the glass door in the backyard, they spotted a silhouette resembling a person lying down. Once inside, the police confirmed that it wasn't a mistake. The silhouette indeed turned out to be a person. On the living room floor, they were faced with a horrifying scene. A middle-aged man lay in a pool of dried blood. His hands were bound, and his throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. What was just a routine check turned into a criminal investigation, the motives of which needed to be determined. The identity of the deceased was quickly established. He was 52-year-old local entrepreneur and owner of a chain of pizza restaurants, Harold Sasko. He was born on September 11, 1961 in Florida, and was the 10th child out of 12 in his family. His relatives described him as a responsible and organized person who was always a leader in everything. Harold worked hard from the age of 14, dreaming of becoming a successful entrepreneur and owning his own business. After studying for about 2 years in college in Oklahoma, Harold worked as an administrator in a chain of pizza restaurants in Texas, where he learned management and was able to save money to achieve his goals. In the 1990s, the Sasko family moved to Kansas. Here, the enterprising Harold opened his own pizzeria. The business was successful, and within a short span of time, Mr. Sasko opened another pizzeria in Topeka and one in Lawrence. But who could have done this to the respectable man, or could Harold have had a dark side to his personality that warranted what happened to him? Investigators quickly established that Harold Sasko had been living with 19-year-old Sarah McLynn for the last few years. However, she was not found at home and could have been the second victim of a brutal attack by a mysterious criminal. Sarah could have been the last person to see Harold alive, but where did the girl disappear to? In order to find the missing Sarah and uncover the mystery of the relationship between an adult man and a young woman, investigators had to piece together information about the complicated and secretive relationships that had been kept under wraps in the deceased Harold Sasko's home. Sarah Gonzalez McLynn was born in 1994 in Topeka, Kansas. She was a normal child, energetic, cheerful, sweet, and smiling. The girl was interested in everything new and fearlessly tried new hobbies. In her teenage years, she faced harassment from a neighbor, and her mental state was shaken. Sarah was very scared by the harsh behavior of the adult man. She felt helpless. During this time, disputes between her parents became more frequent, which aggravated the situation at home and had a detrimental effect on the girl's state. She had to grow up early to try to understand adult difficulties, but the immature psyche of a teenager did not yield the desired result, and Sarah began to drown her problems in alcohol. But the addiction to drinking did not bring relief, and Sarah, having a nervous breakdown, wanted to end her own life. After the attempt, she was hospitalized, where she underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic for some time. Sarah dreamed of leaving her parents' home, where she was suffocated by the toxic atmosphere with parents who could not divide their property during the divorce. She started saving money to rent a room and move out. During a period of despair, Sarah met an adult man who calmed her and boosted her confidence. That was Harold. He ran a mentorship program for youth where he met Sarah, who got a job at one of his restaurants. By the age of 16, she was already taking orders at the pizzeria counter and diligently saving money for her dream. During this time, Sarah was quite happy. She left the hated home for a place where she felt needed. She made friends and established a relationship with Harold. In turn, he became a second father to her, providing the love and attention she sorely lacked. One day, in a confidential conversation, Sarah honestly told him about her problems, and they moved in. Harold offered Sarah to move in with him temporarily until she found separate accommodation. Sarah's mother was against it, but the girl was adamant. After enrolling in college, Sarah moved in with her mentor. It was a forced measure, which Sarah believed should not last long. Harold paid for her education. They established a friendly relationship and grew close as father and daughter. And for a long time, that was indeed the case. Interviews with neighbors and witnesses showed that Harold was a pillar of support for Sarah after the difficulties she had experienced in her family. She found refuge with an adult friend. Harold was both a mentor and a friend to her, despite their significant age difference. After Harold Sasko's demise, the police needed to find Sarah McLynn as quickly as possible, as she could be in danger. Blood tests showed that all the blood belonged to the deceased, indicating that Sarah was alive and could indeed have been abducted. During the search, it was discovered that Sarah's biological father had reported her missing much earlier than the news of Harold's demise became known, but the police had been inactive, assuming teenage maximalism and her frequent departures from home. Detectives believed that the young woman might also have been a victim of an attack. Her search continued. However, the investigation considered various theories of the attack and crime. One of them was robbery. During the house inspection, it was found that some valuables and items had been stolen. Closets were partially emptied. Money and weapons owned by Harold were also stolen. There was disorder everywhere. Most of the items had been thrown out of the closets. After compiling lists of the stolen items, it became clear that only Sarah's belongings were missing. Her tablet, phone, and car were found on the parking lot at the house. For the investigators, this confirmed that the young woman had been abducted. Mr. Sasko's dog, Oliver, also disappeared without a trace. But why would the abductor take the dog? The disappearance of the dog puzzled the investigators, and they noted that Harold's car was also missing from the parking lot. The license plate was checked in the database, and the police began actively searching for the car. By tracking all the recordings from the city's surveillance cameras where the car could have been spotted, they managed to determine the direction of the suspected criminal, but the blurred frames did not allow them to identify him. Information about the stolen car with the possible criminal was distributed to nearby posts along the possible routes, but no clarifying information was received. While waiting for information about the car's movement, the investigators did not waste time. They actively questioned Sarah's friends and acquaintances, hoping to get more information about the unusual cohabitation of the young woman and the mature man. At that time, Harold Sasko had been married 3 times, but was divorced and lived only with Sarah. The fact that a 19-year-old woman was living with a 52-year-old man as friends was peculiar. But no other information about Sarah and Harold's relationship could be obtained. No one had ever seen them as a couple. Sarah had her own room in Harold's house. Could it be that this mature, well-to-do man really became a second father and mentor to the young, lost girl? It really seemed to be the case. Harold Sasko was viewed as a kind and sensitive person and a benefactor. His colleagues also confirmed no closeness between the boss and the employee. The investigation was at a standstill. After a critical 48 hours, Sarah McLynn had still not been found. Investigators were puzzled, but continued their search for the young woman. 3 days into the search efforts, an unexpected phone call to Sarah's parents' home turned the detectives' theory upside down. The awaited call was brief. The caller waited for an answer and then hung up silently. The police, anticipating a call from the suspected abductor, managed to trace it quickly. The caller's location was identified as a 24-hour store at a gas station in Bishop, Texas. Immediately heading to the location and reviewing surveillance footage, the police were shocked to recognize a female figure very similar to Sarah. The woman freely entered the store, made purchases, made the call, then left in Harold's car. Could it be possible that Sarah, whom the police were searching for as a victim of abduction, was actually the criminal and had fled, taking her beloved dog with her? On January 25, 2014, rangers in Everglades National Park in Dade County, Florida, found Sarah McLynn sleeping in the parked car with Oliver, Mr. Sasko's dog. Upon searching the car, several knives, an axe, and Harold's pistol were found. On February 1, 2014, after she waived her extradition hearing in Florida, Sarah was transported back to Kansas, where officers placed her in the Douglas County Jail. The car was seized and sent for inspection. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bloodied knife found was the weapon used in Harold Sasko's demise, but what led to such a brutal crime? During Sarah's interrogation, it was revealed that their relationship initially mirrored that of a father and daughter. He took care of her and told everyone she was his stepdaughter to avoid unnecessary questions. Sasko was aware of Sarah's difficult relationship with her parents. He knew she had been brutally assaulted by a man who had left her with cigarette-burn scars. She had tried to end her life, and she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. Harold promised to take care of her, but the supposed sanctuary included unrestricted access to marijuana and alcohol. Cocaine and ecstasy were also available. He charged her rent, and she bought her own food. He gradually gained control over everything she did. After living together for about 6 months, Harold confessed his love for her. Sarah rejected him, but he persisted in his advances. Eventually, he demanded intimacy as a condition for her to stay with him. Harold took her salary, claiming it as compensation for what he spent on her upkeep daily. He threatened to sue her if she left. Harold degraded and insulted her daily. One day, Harold told Sarah that she was not attractive enough and that men preferred women with more voluptuous figures. With such an appearance, he said, she would never find true love and would never be appealing to men. Sarah objected but felt she had no choice. He paid for her to have a nose job and buttock implants. After these surgeries, Sarah's debt to Harold increased by $10,000. Her last paycheck from the pizzeria was $265. He demeaned her and demanded total submission. Out of desperation, Sarah began drinking alcohol and using psychotropic substances when Harold demanded intimacy. If she tried to resist, he would hold her down. Taking advantage of Sarah's weakened state, Harold repeatedly forced himself on her, and she eventually entered into a relationship with him at his insistence. Sarah fell into a state of depression from which she sought to hide under Harold's supposed protection. She became increasingly restrained and withdrawn. She suffered from victim syndrome and was afraid to leave him or tell anyone. She saw only one way out of her moral confinement, ending her partner's life. Sarah confessed that she made the decision 5 days before the act. On January 14th, Harold came home late in the evening and started working on the sound system. At one point, he asked Sarah to bring him a beer. Knowing that if he drank, he would force himself on her, she decided to act. She added crushed sleeping pills to the beer, which she had prepared in advance. After some time, Harold lost consciousness. Sarah tied his ankles and wrists with zip ties. Then she took a hunting knife and inflicted a deep wound on his neck. During the interrogation, Sarah confessed that, at one moment, she reconsidered her decision to take his life, but Harold was already bleeding out, and she felt she had no choice but to finish what she started. With renewed fury, she continued to stab him in the neck with relentless force, nearly decapitating him. Then Sarah took a shower, packed her belongings, and left in Harold's car, taking Oliver, the dog she had cared for. First, she headed to Texas, then to Florida to see the ocean. That's where the Rangers detained her. The trial for the demise of Harold Sasko began on March 5, 2015, at the Douglas County Courthouse. In his opening statement, Prosecutor Charles Branson told the jury that Sarah McLynn had meticulously planned Harold Sasko's end. Lawrence Police Detective Robert Brown testified for the prosecution, showing that before the act, Sarah McLynn had made Google searches using the phrase, "vulnerable places on the neck." She confessed to inflicting knife wounds on the victim and then cutting his throat. When the detective asked her why she ended Mr. Sasko's life, she replied, "I wanted someone to die." Because of these words, the trial focused on her ability to form the intent to commit the act. However, in a private meeting with the judge prior to the trial, Prosecutor Charles Branson stated that it would be inappropriate for the jury to hear about Harold Sasko's cruel treatment of Sarah McLynn, and he intentionally omitted this information. He believed that the details of the accusations would be inappropriate at the trial stage because they would merely elicit sympathy for the defendant without any supporting evidence. Branson did not want the years of domestic abuse to become public knowledge. Defense attorney Carl Cornwell agreed with the restrictions on presenting evidence of cruel treatment, which he could have introduced in court. Instead, he tried to convince the jury that Sarah was mentally unstable and unable to fully comprehend her actions. Carl Cornwell argued that Douglas County Judge Paula Martin should send the accused, Sarah McLynn, to a state hospital rather than prison, and if a prison sentence was to be decided, sentence her to 25 years due to her mental illness. However, prosecutor David Melton criticized the defense's portrayal of Sarah as a victim. He added that a psychological evaluation at Larned State Hospital, an impartial entity, showed that McLynn did not meet the criteria for dissociative identity disorder. The district judge reported that she had been found to have borderline personality disorder with antisocial tendencies. The report also stated that Sarah McLynn exaggerated the symptoms of her mental illness. In his courtroom address, the prosecutor added that the crime was not committed by a little sweet girl, but by a methodical and far-sighted criminal who had planned it in advance and intentionally left her mobile phone behind to avoid being tracked. In his closing statement, Prosecutor Melton said that in his legal career, he had never encountered something so reprehensible and brutal as the crime committed against Harold Sasko, and therefore, the defendant deserved a sentence ranging from 50 years to life imprisonment. "Some crimes are so evil, so horrendous, that they warrant harsher punishment," Melton said. He argued that Sarah could have chosen a different method, such as suffocation, overdose, or poisoning Sasko. But the fact that McLynn forcefully penetrated Sasko's carotid artery with a long knife spoke to the horror of the act. Addressing the court, the prosecutor repeatedly emphasized that she chose a knife because she wanted to prolong the experience of the act and likely enjoyed it greatly. After considering the arguments, psychological assessments, requests from relatives, and letters to the court, Martin ultimately decided that there is no evidence to support commitment to a psychiatric facility instead of prison, and that the act was committed in a disgusting, barbaric, and brutal manner. Douglas County Judge Paula Martin sentenced Sarah Gonzalez McLynn to 50 years in prison. She must serve at least 50 years before becoming eligible for parole, at which time she will be nearly 70 years old. After the sentencing, Sarah apologized to her own family and Harold Sasko's family. Sarah has appealed the sentence based on the provision of ineffective counsel. In the meantime, the defense lawyers began preparing a clemency petition and uncovered necessary evidence of abuse and the dark side of Harold Sasko that had not been presented to the jury during the trial. It turned out that during the search for Sarah, a significant number of crucial clues were overlooked. After all, the investigation's attention was occupied with investigating a crime against life, not proving domestic abuse. An examination of Harold Sasko's phone confirmed that he had repeatedly shown interest in child-explicit material. He downloaded hundreds of videos to his phone and visited X-rated sites discussing children, teenagers, and zoophilia. At least 20 times, he visited websites where men were intimate or appeared to be intimate with women who seemed to be asleep. The police found a camera and flash drives on a desk in Sasko's bedroom. A detective stated that the images found on the flash drives showed that Sasko and Sarah McLynn were just friends who spent time together. The defense attorneys were not allowed to review the files. Sarah was shocked and confused when the evidence of harsh treatment was not presented in court. She did not give up on proving that at the moment of ending her aggressor's life, she saw no other way to save herself. On March 20th, 2015, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury found Sarah Gonzalez McLynn guilty of first-degree premeditated homicide with aggravating circumstances, unaware of the months of harsh treatment that preceded her dreadful crime. Now her lawyers hope to get her out of prison, convincing the governor to pardon her, which is a long-term attempt to correct what they consider an injustice. In 2021, the newly elected district attorney of Douglas County, Susana Valdez, struck a stunning deal. The sentence for Sarah McLynn was reduced by half in exchange for waiving the right to appeal. The case of Sarah McLynn is one of the most confusing and recurring institutional failures where, in the pursuit of justice, the truth remains sidelined. Currently, Sarah Gonzalez McLynn remains incarcerated at the correctional facility in Topeka, Kansas. The earliest she can be released is in 2039, but strangely enough, prison gave Sarah a chance to heal. In her only interview, she admitted that being locked up was the biggest relief for her. She found time to reflect on what had happened. She wrote letters to God, trying to cope with her shame. In prison, she trains Labrador and Golden Retrievers for service in an organization based in Washington, Kansas. Sarah says that the dogs have healed her more than she could have ever imagined. In her statement, Sarah said that since she's been in prison, she's dedicated every day to becoming better, not just for herself, but for her family and society. I will continue to ensure that everything that happened was not in vain, as I am no longer the young woman who felt hopeless and didn't know what to do. At the scene where Harold Sasko's life was ended, the word freedom was written on the wall in blood, a word the investigators initially struggled to decipher. During questioning, Sarah replied that she wrote what she felt after committing the crime. Paradoxically, it was in prison that Sarah Gonzalez McLynn found her freedom.
A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offenses punishable by death at the hands of relatives can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often the perpetrators face no punishment and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Sami Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter, Sami, was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mida was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines.
As his business prospered, he helped two of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Muhammad's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and, while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shaquille, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, Life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport, a new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shaheed family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shaheed arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shaheed called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shaheed's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shaheed died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shakil was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami,
in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shakil, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shakil recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Matiyaz Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahid family. Before starting the story, I want to apologize for my bad English. I am not a native speaker. However, I am trying my best for you guys. Thanks for your understanding. It's pretty exciting to admit to your parents the decision to play your own wedding. Tina Thomas was a lot more nervous than her fiancé Gabe Watson. Tina was 26 years old at the time, just like her future husband, and this was her third serious relationship and second attempt at a wedding. Her first attempt to build a family with boyfriend Scott McCulloch ended in failure. No, the relationship between young people were just fine, but only Tina's mother was against this wedding, and Scott himself she did not like. There were no specific claims, but like every mother, she wanted a better and happier life for her daughter, and Tina herself, at that moment, was still very young. For this reason, the couple soon parted. The mirage of a joint future melted away. The second attempt, with Stan Marks, also failed. Here, Tina's parents did not play any role. The couple could not overcome the first 3-year crisis, and they parted by mutual consent. Finally, on Christmas Eve, at a party of friends, Tina meets Gabe Watson. We can't say it was love at first sight, on the contrary. The relationship was built more as mutual support for each other after a recent breakup. Yes, perhaps this is not the most joyful reason to start building a new relationship, but 2 years later, Gabe proposed marriage to Tina. Tina, having learned from bitter experience, said she agreed, but couldn't do it without parental blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided, like a real prince, beautifully and romantically appealed to the parents of his chosen one and chose Valentine's Day. But Tina's father was away, so the dinner was moved to the next day. On February 15th, during the dinner, when Watson voiced his decision to live with Tina all his life hand in hand, the father of the bride asked a seemingly simple question to the groom. "Does he love Tina?" Gabe stammered like a schoolboy but never answered. His father considered this reaction to be a common embarrassment among strangers. Then he asked his daughter the same question. Surprisingly, Tina did not answer this question directly either, but began her speech by saying that she was afraid of being alone at the age of 26. The father thought for a while and blessed the young ones. Preparing for a wedding takes a lot of time and effort, and while Tina was thinking about her outfit, her guests, and the whole wedding, Gabe was only planning the honeymoon. He didn't care at all how his future wife wanted to spend her vacation.
He had already decided everything for her. His plan was to go to the Great Barrier Reef, which is located in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, and go diving there. First of all, to look at the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank back in 1911. The problem was that Tina, unlike Gabe, wasn't into diving. Yes, he took her scuba diving in the pool sometimes, in calm water under the supervision of lifeguards, but no more than that. Gabe, himself, was an experienced scuba diver. He was completing a rescue diving course and had over 50 dives to his credit at the time, and of course it wasn't in a pool. If you don't learn to dive by our honeymoon, I'm warning you right away. You're staying home, walking the dog, or pruning roses in the garden. You're not going anywhere with me, said Gabe. Tina had no choice. In fact, Gabe even took out a loan to buy her own equipment and pay for her fiancé's classes. The first instructor Tina had taken lessons with was disappointed in her skills and even warned Gabe that his fiancée had absolutely no skills for open ocean swimming. A furious Gabe wouldn't listen to the diving instructor, accusing him of being the one who couldn't explain and refused to continue the class. The second instructor rather quickly gave Tina a credit, although then, and noted that Tina does everything from under the stick, solely to please her future husband. On October 11th, the young couple finally got married, and after 2 days, Tina and Gabe flew to Australia, spending on a trip of $10,000 which gave them for the wedding. It should be noted that Gabe devoted part of the honeymoon to Tina. They walked around Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium and the zoo. Tina was excited, but the closer they got to going to the Great Barrier Reef, the sadder she became. On the morning of October 21st, they flew to Townsville, and in the evening boarded a boat to one of the most beautiful places on Earth and every diver's dream. After a while, employees of the diving company will tell that in fact, the couple did not look like experienced divers, and even Gabe, who had graduated from courses and had experience behind him, could hardly understand the equipment, as if he saw it for the first time in his life. But nevertheless, it was he who helped Tina to pass the exam before diving, although such a test should be conducted separately, and when the instructor offered Tina his help underwater, she refused. It was also noted in the dive log that there was a strong current that day, and this moment in history should not be missed or glossed over. Gabe, as I said, helped his wife sort out the equipment they had bought back in the US and went to get the tanks they had to rent. Gabe took an 11-liter tank for himself and gave his wife an 8.5-liter tank, which for this place was an extremely small volume or even dangerous, given Tina's experience, or rather lack thereof. It was not possible to descend to the Townsville Titanic from the first time. Tina asked for additional cargo because she could not dive to depth, and Gabe at first did not work underwater computer, which calculates the necessary speed of diving and ascent, as well as shows the amount of oxygen in the cylinders. After returning to the boat, the computer worked and they tried again. The wreck was 49 feet deep, and Tina was the first to submerge, Gabe swimming behind her. From Gabe's statement, "At first everything was fine. At some point Tina stopped, started waving at me, and later signaled that she wanted to go up. I realized right away that she was just panicking. She used to do that. By this time we were halfway up, so I decided to calm her down and stay with her at the same depth for a while, without further diving, so that she could psychologically get used to the pressure. She continued to breathe very deeply, which was unsafe, and that's when I noticed she was sinking. I tried to grab her belt to hold her down, but she swung her arms so hard that she knocked the mask off my face. While I was putting the mask back on my face, though it didn't take long, Tina was already too far away from me. For a while I tried to swim to her, but I was unsuccessful. Then I decided to return to the surface to ask for help from the lifeguards. On the way, I met another swimmer with a narrow-set eye, but he paid no attention to my signs for help. Yes, there were 2 Asian men with them at depth, but neither of them confirmed Gabe's words about his request for help. Later, when the police took underwater computer readings, they confirmed that Gabe did try to swim after his drowning wife for a while, but eventually gave up the attempt very quickly. Although the ascent to the surface itself was not an emergency, on the contrary, Gabe surfaced as instructed, stopping at each required depth level. As for the other divers, each of them, when questioned by police, claimed that Gabe could have saved his wife, but he simply did not. In addition, this tragic incident occurred at the very beginning of their dive, and therefore Gabe had enough oxygen in his tanks to swim to the bottom and return back to the surface. The rescuers on duty on the ship, as soon as they realized what had happened, immediately went in search of Tina and found her very quickly. But unfortunately, it was too late. Tina was lying on her back, with her eyes open under her mask, at a depth of 82 feet. Her body was immediately lifted up, and on the deck of the yacht, they gave her artificial respiration for about 40 minutes. But to no avail, Tina died. Gabe all this time did not come close to his wife, but only stood somewhere aside, and according to witnesses, naively sniffed his nose. The same employees of the company said that the young man on the way to the shore and smiled and even played cards with other passengers. Gabe denied this in court. The subsequent autopsy of Tina showed that not everything was so clear.
Yes, there are no signs of obvious violent death, but there are bruises on the neck. There are traces of blood in the nostrils, which is also common at the 82-foot depth where Tina's body was found. There are no traces of alcohol in the blood, but there are high levels of drugs such as ibuprofen and paracetamol, although these drugs are used in the treatment of seasickness. A small amount of fluid was seen in the lungs. The report stated that Tina died from drowning, but it is possible that she drowned while already deprived of oxygen. Tina's gear was checked by the Australian Water Police, but no malfunctions were noted. The police could have written it off as an accident. An inexperienced diver ignored safety rules and paid for it with his life. A very common case, unfortunately. But only there were suspicious moments in this story, such as rather ambiguous results of the autopsy. Also, according to the diving team, strange behavior of Watson, which does not fit into the conventional picture, where the husband grieves for his wife who just died. All these factors did not give so easily close the case. And that's why the investigation was taking quite a long time.
Gabe realized the detectives were digging for him. In addition, Tina's parents did not want to accept what had happened as a tragic accident and wanted to see their son-in-law in the dock. If not as the murderer of their daughter, then at least as a man who had not helped her. During the first interrogation, the police noted that the suspect was in shock, crying and laughing, twitching nervously, asking to call his father, who complained of pain in his ears, and begging him to tell his wife's parents about the tragedy. Late at night, Gabe was released. He went to the yacht that belonged to the company that sent them to the reef and asked them for a night's lodging, arguing that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but because his wife had died, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half of the cost of their dive. In fact, he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flies to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. That same day, at Gabe's request, they go to the morgue. Gabe wanted to see his wife one more time. Because the husband was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee called the detective who was in charge of the case. In theory, Gabe could have hidden some evidence, but the grief-stricken husband only cried, held his wife's cold hand, and begged her forgiveness, not realizing at all that the police officer was standing outside the door at the time, recording him on a tape recorder. "I didn't mean to hurt you." These are the words Detective Lawrence later uses against Gabe in court. Then at the morgue, "You told Tina you didn't mean to hurt her. What did you mean by that?" Lawrence will ask his question. The story of Gabe's sore ear was repeated again as he was traveling home with his wife's body. During a layover in Oakland, he sought medical attention on the airport grounds and was held there for evaluation. According to the investigation, this was done on purpose to avoid seeing Tina's father. However, and divers will confirm this, ear problems are a fairly common ailment among divers. Tina's funeral was held on November 5th, where Gabe still had to meet with the deceased's father. Gabe, almost in full view of everyone, took off his wife's wedding ring, putting it on his ring finger over hers, as well as earrings, which he immediately handed over to his father-in-law. Watson and the Thomas family never crossed paths again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe would be asked the question, "Did you really take your wife's jewelry off during the funeral?" Gabe will only smile and shrug. I don't think I could have done it later. Everyone had different opinions about Gabe. Some said that this chubby, funny man was quite a kind man, and some, on the contrary, called him a tyrant and a despot. But they all agreed on one thing. Gabe and Tina were not happy, or at least they didn't seem to be. Tina's friends confirmed what she'd told her father at a family dinner on February 15th. Her union with Gabe was just a way to avoid dying alone, and that fear had led Tina to die on the seabed. Also, the victim, who died shortly before their honeymoon, confessed to a friend that her husband dragged her by the hand to an insurance company where he forced her to insure his life at a higher interest rate in case of death, and put his name in the column beneficiary. This testimony was checked through the insurance agent, and he confirmed everything. The cab driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht was also questioned. Tina cried the whole way, but her husband paid no attention to her. Finally, Tina's friend Amanda Phillips told another story, and it became clear what the couple's relationship was really like. This damn jerk videotaped Tina urinating in the bathroom and then edited it and put it in a tape of them celebrating Christmas. That would have been okay, but he turned it on at a general viewing with a full house of guests. He laughed like a horse, while everyone twiddled their fingers around their temples and tried to explain to him that it was a very low act. I was clutching crosses on my fingers so Tina wouldn't get the idea to marry him. While removing jewelry right during a funeral may seem like a frightening and denunciatory act on Gabe's part, during the trial, in 2008, the jury was shown an extremely disturbing footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers from it and carrying them away. They were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father noticed the missing flowers, and to find out the thief, he set up a hidden camera in the next row among the monuments, but he never expected to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by such an act. In court, Gabe's defense was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their own on an extreme honeymoon, and the lack of flowers on the grave was her request, which sounded very strange and unlikely. There's no telling how long the search for evidence would have dragged on if the cops had put on the exact same gear the newlyweds had and hadn't tried to stage that incident. Gabe said Tina drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face. It turned out it was impossible to put the mask on underwater by yourself unless you used another source of air, in this case, Tina's oxygen. In late November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and on June 5, 2009, Gabe's trial began, where he pleaded guilty, but only to failing to save his wife, so he was charged with negligent homicide and sent to prison for 18 months. After completing his sentence, Gabe returned home to the U.S., but a year later, the now U.S. court charged him with first-degree murder, the motive for which was to receive insurance payments after the death of his wife. Gabe's lawyer tried to defend his client, shifting all the blame on the diving company, that the employees of this company did not take care of the safety of tourists, and now, afraid of losing their license, and therefore the whole business, are trying to shift the blame on the unhappy husband who has already served his time in another country. As for the money received from the insurance company, the payout amounted to $33,000, while Gabe spent much more money on lawyers and additional expertise. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to insist that this spending was only because the husband could not assume that he would not be believed, and also the prosecutor refused to accept the fact that Gabe, with a degree in drowning rescue in hand, could not even save his wife. When Gabe had his say, he addressed the jury. It's been 7 years since the tragedy, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about that terrible day. The public has pounced on me, blaming me for my wife's death, calling me a murderer. There wasn't a single person who looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, I understand how bad you feel, but it's not your fault." On the contrary, everyone just wants me dead. And here I can only understand my late wife's parents. Yes, they will never forgive me, no matter how much I kneel before them, and no matter how much I beg their forgiveness. You often hear the phrase, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child," but I've never heard anyone say, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a wife, especially on a honeymoon." If I can be accused of anything, it's that I didn't make enough effort to save Tina, but I've already received my punishment for that. Perhaps you all would have been satisfied if I had drowned with my wife then, 7 years ago. But I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't be able to rise from the bottom to the top. I just wanted to live, as I still want to live now. No evidence of Gabe's guilt was presented to the court. The jury found Gabe not guilty. What do you guys think? Is Gabe guilty of Tina's death? Malibu Creek State Park is a scenic recreation area 25 miles from downtown Los Angeles that has been used as a backdrop for popular movies and television shows. But when a young man was murdered in Malibu Creek while camping with his 2 daughters on a summer afternoon in 2018, it sent the Southern California community into hysterics. During the investigation, it became clear that this crime was connected to a string of unsolved incidents that had occurred earlier in the same area. This information spawned all sorts of universal conspiracy theories and public paranoia. Our story today is about what happens when lightning strikes in the most terrifying way imaginable. Let's begin. In the morning, police officers knocked on a young woman's house. She opened the door, and when she heard, "Are you Tristan Baudette's wife?" she knew the news would be sad, and she was not mistaken. 2 police officers informed the woman that her husband had been shot dead in his tent during the night. She left in a hurry to the place of tragedy because their daughters remained there. It was a long drive, and tears spontaneously flowed from her eyes. Erica Wu was the 4th of 5 children in a family of immigrants from China. She lost her father early and saw how difficult it was for her mother to raise her children alone. Erica grew up a quiet and responsible child who keeps everything under control. When she met Tristan, he turned out to be the complete opposite of her. He didn't think too much and didn't worry about anything at all. He just did what he wanted to do. Tristan grew up in Fresno, California. His parents were natives of the area. His father sold insurance and his mother was a teacher. His parents divorced when he was only 3 years old. He was young, but old enough to remember it. Tristan and Erica met in high school. In the beginning, they were just acquaintances, but as time went on, their relationship grew closer. They spent a lot of time together, studied together, and shared their joys and sorrows with each other, despite being complete opposites of each other in personality. Soon something more grew out of their friendship, and they started dating. Erica went to Stanford University, and Tristan went to the University of California, San Diego. But they kept in touch, emailing every day, talking on the phone every night. They didn't see each other as often as they would have liked, but they found a way to stay together. In their 2nd year of medical school, Erica and Tristan got engaged, and a year later, they decided to settle in San Francisco. In 2008, they were married in Tilden Park in front of all their friends and family, in a large rented room with glass walls and a stone clearing outside. After a year, Tristan and Erica moved to Long Beach in Southern California, and then to Irvine, where Erica began work at UCLA, and Tristan found a job with a large pharmaceutical company. It took them both a while to adjust to Orange County, but that's where they were truly happy. Their first daughter was born in 2014. Their second daughter was born 2 years later. Fatherhood made Tristan happy. He became a lark, waking up with the girls, making them breakfast and letting Erica rest. His passion continued to be hiking and camping. He took every opportunity to go to the woods or mountains as a family. He regularly took his daughters on hikes and bike rides. After completing her internship, Erica found a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the family began making plans to move back north. They found a house in a suburb south of San Francisco with all the necessary infrastructure nearby and a good school for their daughters. Tristan found a new job with a pharmaceutical company in the same neighborhood. They set a date to move at the end of June, a week after Erica was due to take her qualifying exam. Tristan and Erica's son-in-law, Scott, offered to pick up their daughters from home the night before so she could study for the exam in peace. On June 21st, 2018, Tristan had breakfast with Erica and their daughters and then packed up to go to his car. At the garage door, he hugged and kissed Erica, wished her good luck on the exam, and promised to celebrate with her when she returned the next day. Tristan, Scott, and the girls drove north to Malibu Creek State Park. They got there toward evening and were assigned a place to camp at the gate. When they arrived, Tristan looked around and decided that they could find a much better place. They surveyed the campground and found another spot that Tristan thought was perfect. They set up camp there taking turns looking after the girls and setting up the tents. The day was full of excitement. The excitement of the trip to the park, the first impressions of setting up the tents and cooking over the fire had exhausted the girls, and as soon as it was dark, Tristan put them to bed. The men sat around the fire for a while longer and then dispersed to their tents, saying goodbye until morning. The night was quiet and dark. The sky was covered with clouds, and the moon did not illuminate the land. In the early morning hours of June 22nd, Scott awoke to a loud popping sound. The man got up to check where the sound was coming from, but it was followed by several more pops. He figured it was fireworks, but hearing a baby crying from Tristan's tent scared him and went to check it out. Cattle walked over to the tent and called out to Tristan several times, but he didn't respond, and the crying only got worse. He went inside and shined his flashlight into the tent. Scott was soothing the younger girl and kept calling Tristan's name. When he approached the man, he found him unconscious. Tristan was pale and unresponsive to light. No pulse was palpable. A pool of blood had formed next to Tristan's head. Scott tried to administer first aid to his friend, but it was too late. Tristan Baudet died at the scene. Scott called rangers who were working at the park and reported the incident. Around 4:40 a.m. on June 22, 2018, police received reports of a shooting at Malibu Creek State Park. Tristan and Erica's daughters were not touched by the shooter. One fatal bullet, like a bolt of lightning, struck Tristan in the head, who was killed instantly. The second bullet struck the torso of a man who was already dead. Bullet holes were visible in the tent. It looked as if some unknown person had fired a gun aimlessly into the tent at dawn, and the girls were miraculously unharmed. This fact gave the impression that the shooter did not care who he shot. Law enforcement officers quickly arrived at the scene of the tragedy and began interviewing vacationers who were in the park and could have seen the intruder. But, to the horror of the patrolmen, no one saw a man with a gun. Lengthy interviews with vacationers and park employees did not answer the investigators' questions. Since the investigation began, police have made almost no statements to witnesses. But later, one witness did come forward. A woman who was in a tent set up next to Tristan and Scott at the time of the attack admitted that she heard 5 shots in a row around 4:45 a.m. and wanted to call police immediately, but was very scared, thinking the shooter might be nearby and would shoot her too. After 20 minutes, she decided to leave the tent and called emergency services. Her call was the second call, as after the Rangers' call, rescuers were already on their way to Malibu Creek. While examining the scene, investigators noticed the caliber of the weapon was consistent with a hunting rifle, and such ammunition tends to retain killing power, meaning the bullet could have traveled quite a distance. A search was initiated for a location within that radius from where the shooting had originated. Detectives, with the help of service dogs, combed the area in and around the family tent with the assistance of police and forensics, but nothing suspicious was found to help solve the case. No arrests were made, and detectives were unable to provide any information about the suspect or his motives. Investigators were asking the same questions. Who could have shot the scientist, and where could the young father have made deadly enemies? Could it have been related to the industry in which he worked and conducted his research? Dr. Tristan Baudet was a research scientist who worked for a pharmaceutical company. Before his death, he questioned the safety of vaccines. He was working on safer vaccines, and his work did cause controversy in pharmaceutical industry circles. But this version of premeditated murder because of Tristan's research has remained unproven. Interviews with numerous witnesses continued, and after checking many facts, it became obvious that the murder of Tristan Baudet was no accident. This attack was the 6th. Moreover, 2 of them had been carried out on the very tent camp that Tristan and Scott had used. This led to serious concerns that a sniper was on the loose. Malibu Creek Park was closed to the public. The public was outraged at the irresponsibility of the authorities who had not given serious consideration to the earlier attacks in the park, because they were not fatal. Tourists were outraged by the news. It turned out that such a popular place is an area that is periodically shelled by some intruder. After the first cases with injuries, no one closed the park or investigated it. Tourists were not notified of the incidents. In fact, the police wrote off every incident in the park as hunter-related accidents. After Tristan's murder, the park was still closed, and the public arrived in shock at the carelessness of the security services. The safety of park visitors is more important to us than anything else, city officials said, and soon closed Malibu Creek Park. However, the neighborhood did not become less dangerous for locals after the park's closure. Police officers received complaints of gunfire in that area about 9 times. The search for the perpetrator continued, but there wasn't much evidence at the scene. Authorities confirmed that none of the campers saw anyone entering the campground at the time. It became apparent that the shooter was inhabiting the park. The family of Tristan Baudet, who died on June 22nd, has expressed condolences to the relatives of the victims and has chosen to remain in the shadows from all the hype that has been stirred up by the public. Using the last chance to get information about the shooter, authorities offered a $30,000 reward for any information about the crimes. But despite the reward offered for information about the possible perpetrator, the motive and the perpetrator remained unknown for months. Investigators had no choice but to begin unraveling the tangle of mysterious gunshots, because the death of a young father, Tristan Baudet, fit into a series of violent crimes that occurred in those places in recent years. The roots of this tangled story go back to November 2016. The first incident happened to biologist James Rogers. He went to Malibu Creek Park for a camping trip, set up camp, and fell asleep in a hammock. He was awakened by a searing pain in his right arm. The man thought he had been bitten by some rodent or bat and went to the hospital. The doctors gave him a rabies vaccination and sent him home. As his arm began to heal, he noticed pieces of metal in the wound that looked like gunshot. The second incident occurred in January 2017 when Melissa Tatangelo and her lover parked their car in the parking lot of the same Malibu Creek Park and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, they heard a loud gunshot and the smell of burnt metal. In the morning, they discovered a hole in the back of the car from a shotgun blast. Locals were whispering perhaps a dangerous criminal with a firearm was walking around in their neighborhood. But at the time, police attention was not drawn to these episodes. In the summer of 2018, people began to recall other scary incidents from years past. There was talk that in 2009, 24-year-old Mitrice Richardson went missing in the remote hills of California. Almost a year later, her remains were found a few miles from a railroad station. In 2017, 20-year-old Elaine Park went missing. She was last seen in the California town of Calabasas. A few days later, her car with her personal belongings was found on the side of the road along the Pacific coast in Malibu. The American woman's body was never found. A month before the latest crime, which took place in a tent in Malibu Creek Park, another mutilated corpse with signs of violence appeared. The deceased was lying in a tent across the street from the park. Investigators confronted with the string of attacks labeled Malibu Creek Park as a dumping ground for the bodies. At first, the crimes seemed to have no other connection, but as the investigation progressed, new details began to emerge. The driver of a Tesla electric car, who has remained anonymous, said that 4 days before Tristan Baudet was killed, around 4:30 a.m., someone fired shots at his car. However, Los Angeles detectives have never been able to prove that the crimes are all connected. The townspeople discussed the possible motives of the perpetrator in fear and advised each other not to leave doors and windows open. Locals refused to believe that a serial criminal had taken up residence in such a beautiful area where a celebrity could be found on every corner. Some speculated that the man's death could have been a ridiculous accident when someone was once again practicing shooting. Perhaps Tristan Baudet was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did the man's death have a connection to the missing women and the mutilated bodies of vacationers? But unfortunately, police had no leads they could tell the town's terrified residents about. In August, investigators held a meeting and officially admitted that the investigation had reached a dead end. In desperation, people speculated, Perhaps he was killed because of a particularly valuable and secret project Tristan was working on, or perhaps his death was connected to the drug cartels and illegal drugs he was allegedly growing in remote corners of the park. The only thing to do was to wait, because if there is a criminal, he is sure to leave a trace, and so it was. In addition to violent crimes, near Malibu Creek Park, someone stole food and broke into abandoned buildings. The criminal was repeatedly caught on hidden cameras. He was followed, but the sinister bandit could not be apprehended. A sketch of the burglar has been compiled. Amidst the minor offenses, gunshots continued to ring out in the hills. About the same time, a park employee was driving through Malibu Creek and saw a man on the side of the road who asked for a ride. The stranger's face resembled a sketch of a suspected thief, so the driver turned him down. Instead, he reported the incident to police officers. Patrolmen in 3 helicopters combed the park area until dusk, to no avail. Then another attack on the community center occurred. The perpetrator broke a glass window and vandalized a vending machine in search of food. Police officers immediately responded to the call and tracked down the bandit from fresh shoe prints. A 42-year-old man named Anthony Rauda, dressed in all black, was apprehended. A rifle was found in his backpack. According to unofficial reports, the intruder was homeless and had been stealing food to survive. One of his relatives stated that Anthony had been arrested twice in the past 4 months. He was initially detained for illegal border crossing but was soon released. The relative also added that Anthony Rauda had been living in that neighborhood for 10 years and was afraid of the people around him. On October 10, 2018, nearly 4 months after the murder of Tristan Baudet, alleged perpetrator Anthony Rauda was taken into custody in a canyon near the park with a rifle in his backpack. Sheriff's authorities described him as a survivalist outdoorsman. He was first arrested in connection with several thefts in the area and later charged with the murder of Tristan Baudet and involvement in other shootings. Anthony Rauda had previously served time in state prison for possession of explosives and then for possession of a loaded handgun, which is illegal for people convicted of felonies. He was on probation at the time of his arrest, authorities said, during the investigation of Tristan Baudet, and before Anthony Rauda's arrest. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said there had been at least 7 other unsolved shootings in the area since November 2016. In early January 2023, state authorities did indict Anthony Rauda for all the shootings recorded in the Malibu Creek area in recent years. In total, he had to answer for 10 attempted murders, 5 burglaries, and the crime against Tristan Baudet. Police seemed to have found a scapegoat and were ready to close all the cases by pinning them on one man. Authorities believe the suspect was also involved in other unsolved crimes committed nearly 10 years ago. This 10-year blood fever would make for a Hollywood movie, said one of the detectives who worked on the case. Indeed, the whole story is like the script of a new blockbuster movie, but in 2 parts, where in the second part, the real culprit of the crime will still be found. Anthony Rauda was charged with murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and 5 counts of second-degree burglary. Detectives said the charges were based on a comparison of bullets found at the scene of Tristan's death and other locations where gunfire was heard. His case has been postponed until he can find representation, according to the report. There were also questions about Anthony's ability to stand trial. For a long time, he remained in custody and insisted on his innocence. In November 2018, Anthony Rauda did appear in court. However, at the first hearing, the man had to be removed from the hall as the defendant began to shout, use profanity, and bang on the walls of his cell. When the bailiffs removed him, he demanded the dismissal of his court-appointed lawyer. Locals cherished the hope that Tristan Baudet's killer had finally been found, but the gunshots in the middle of the night in Malibu Creek never stopped. A jury found Anthony Rauda guilty of 1 count of attempted murder and 1 count of shooting at a vehicle 4 days before Tristan Baudet's death. The jury acquitted Anthony Rauda of the first-degree murder charge, but found him guilty of second-degree murder. He faced 40 years to life in prison.
A statement from the district attorney's office said a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge sentenced 46-year-old Anthony Rauda to 119 years in prison. But was the man punished by state law? Could Anthony Rauda have been so disturbed to have fired indiscriminate shots at people in the mountains over the past few years? There seemed to be evidence to suggest so. What about the gunshots that people continued to hear at night, even after the suspect was arrested? A local Malibu journalist, who was skeptical from the start, continues to doubt the state's version of events. Personally, I think the shooter is still out there somewhere, she says. There's something convenient about pursuing a burglary suspect, she says, perhaps a result of the political events following Tristan's death. Everything that's happened is 1,000,000% coincidence, Erica Wu believes. Tristan was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, I'm also wondering, why did this happen to us? Who's to blame? In late December 2018, Erica Wu, the wife of the deceased Tristan Baudet, filed a complaint against authorities in Los Angeles and California. She complained against law enforcers for failing to warn locals about the dangers of recreation in Malibu Creek Park, despite a series of deaths. The woman demanded $90 million in compensation. Police acknowledged the lawsuit but declined to comment. Nevertheless, the question remains, could what happened to Tristan Baudet have been prevented? Obviously, the motive for the crime was never established. Serial criminals usually memorize everything, keep trophies, or leave distinctive footprints. But Anthony was so disorganized, so unpredictable, it's a miracle he was identified at all. So some social outcast was blindly taking revenge on all people, shooting whoever God sent, venting his anger for no particular purpose. He didn't even know if his victims were killed or if they even existed. Most likely, this story of the Malibu Creek shooter will have a sequel after all, and we hope that it will end with the real criminal being punished and no new victims appearing.
Today, we're going to visit Indianapolis. It is a blend of modernity and original origins, ancient traditions, and advanced technology. Indianapolis boasts art museums that showcase examples of cultural achievements from past centuries and modern times. Indianapolis hosts many festivals and events each year, with the Indy 500 automobile race being the most popular. But in our story, the tranquil Indianapolis that was to become for the Blackburn family a center of peace and God's home on earth became the site of a violent tragedy. On the morning of November 10, 2015, a car parked outside a home on Sunnyfield Court. Davy Blackburn had returned from his daily workout at the gym. He was about to get out of the car, but a phone call kept him in the vehicle for a few minutes. After finishing the call, he leisurely got out of the car and went into the house. When he opened the door, he froze, and the gym bag fell out of his hands. His wife was lying on the living room floor in a pool of blood. Davy was confused and badly shocked. He rushed to his beloved, gave her a cursory examination, felt for a pulse, and urgently dialed the emergency phone number. The young woman was alive. In the living room where the tragedy occurred was a complete mess. Things were scattered. The purse of the unfortunate was emptied. On the second floor of the house, a small child was crying. Emergency services arrived at the house after 8 minutes. The area was cordoned off. The house was filled with police officers and investigators. The victim was rushed to the hospital. She turned out to be 28-year-old Amanda Blackburn. But let's start in order not to miss any important details of this tragic story. Amanda Grace Byers was born on July 31st, 1987 in Muskegon, Michigan. She attended school in Indianapolis, Indiana, but the family moved to Elkhart in 1995. There, Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, and as early as 2008, she graduated from Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida with an associate's degree. Amanda grew up in a deeply religious family where Christianity and the power of God's Word were paramount. Amanda's father was the lead pastor of First Baptist Church in Elkhart, Indiana. The religious traditions of the church, sermons and psalter the girl knew from childhood by heart and honored them unconditionally. When other children were in a hurry to grow up to know the taste of adult life, to go to parties and fall in love, Amanda loved Jesus and dreamed of serving him. But God already loved his Amanda. After all, he had created her in the likeness of an angel, a blonde-haired, slender girl with an open, kind smile and sincere intentions. But not only the girl's appearance was perfect, her thoughts and heart were also virgin. In every act of Amanda was love for her neighbor. As a teenager, Amanda took a vow of chastity and agreed not to even kiss a man until she was married, and she was always true to her word. But the girl's heart beat harder when she met her true and only love. It turned out to be Davy Blackburn. He was a native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The guy studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University and was also from a Christian and believing family. Davy and Amanda met on a blind date at a Hawk Nelson Christian band concert organized by her sister and Davy's best friend. At that time, they were studying in different colleges, but every vacation the lovers spent together. It was pure platonic love, devoid of earthly lusts. They took walks together, shared their innermost thoughts and favorite excerpts from church books. They were never bored, for they knew how to rejoice in small things, and sincerely joked with each other. Once, before returning to school, Davy and Amanda had a mock milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. Davy then jokingly called Amanda a milk girl. Looking at her, he realized he had met the girl he wanted to marry. The couple dated long distance for a long time. They were constantly messaging each other on messengers, called each other and chatted for hours. Every vacation they spent together. They were so reverent and tender about a serious relationship between a man and a woman that they visited a psychologist for a long time to learn how to communicate properly. On August 1st, 2008, the marriage ceremony of Amanda and Davy Blackburn took place. After the wedding, Davy told friends that from the moment he kissed Amanda, he knew that because of God's plan, there would be a special bond between them. For the first 4 years after the wedding, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina. Davy was an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble, but the young man wanted more, and he suggested to Amanda that she move to Indianapolis to organize a new church for youth. Davy worked as a youth pastor, production director, and assistant campus pastor. Amanda was reluctant to leave her family and part with her loved ones, and for a while struggled with the need to leave South Carolina. But she finally relented after her husband told her that God must have big things in store for them. In 2012, the Blackburns moved from South Carolina to Indianapolis to plant an independent, high-profile church in the North Side. The religious organization started by the young family was geared toward young people, as is made clear in the weekly videos the couple posted on their website about relationship advice, conflict resolution, and what the Bible says about intimate relationships. In 2014, the family had their firstborn child, Weston Blackburn. The family was perfectly happy. They had a comfortable home on a quiet street, a favorite job in the church, which was regularly attended by a large number of young people. Their sermons were listened to and believed in. They lived in perfect harmony and understanding. But the day of November 10th, 2015, changed the family's life once and for all. Ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence in the 2800 block of Sunnyfield Court around 8:30 a.m. The ambulance crews arrived at the Blackburn residence. The pregnant young woman was rushed to the hospital where she was hooked up to a ventilator and underwent a series of resuscitative measures. But sadly, Amanda died the next day, along with her unborn baby. As it turned out, the family was expecting a baby girl who was named Evie Grace at her burial. Her death sparked a lot of sympathy and prayers on social media for an extended period of time as friends, family members, and strangers mourned Amanda with public posts. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared dead, Davy released an official statement saying that Amanda made it her life's calling to love and serve everyone she knew. She made it her life's mission to know Jesus as her personal Savior to multitudes. Through her death and legacy, more people will come to a saving faith in Christ. I know without a shadow of a doubt that she wants me to continue what we started here in Indy. I firmly believe that God is still good, that He is taking our tragedy and turning it into triumph, and that the best is indeed yet to come." Dave wrote. The murder of the pregnant woman was a blow not only to the entire Orthodox family, but also a shock to the entire state. People demanded that the perpetrator of Amanda and her unborn child be found and punished. In his first interview under oath, Davy Blackburn said he found his wife Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor. She was partially naked, with her underwear lying nearby, herself lying on the floor in a pool of blood face down. The pastor told investigators that he left the house around 6 a.m. to go to the fitness center to work out. When he left the door unlocked. "You always do that too, don't you? You leave and don't lock the door?" he told investigators. It's hard to say whether the criminals would have stopped if Davy had still used the key, but it's pretty obvious that they wouldn't have entered the house so easily, and Amanda had precious time to contact emergency services. But that didn't happen, and the attack left Amanda with 3 gunshot wounds, one of which was to the head. No arrests were made in the case. Just days after the crime, police quickly determined that her husband, Davy Blackburn, was not involved in the horrific incident. However, in the trial transcripts, Davy Blackburn's testimony is supplemented by the testimony of the first emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department, Scott Floyd, who arrived at the home after Davy's 911 call. He said Davy Blackburn was outside at the end of the driveway with bloody hands when they arrived at the house. Scott stated that Davy was very calm at the time. According to Scott, Davy did not understand what had happened to his wife, Amanda. He maintained that she was lying on the floor and he could not wake her up. Davy claimed that he came home from the gym at about 7:30 a.m. and continued his phone call with his friend Kenneth Wagner in the driveway, occasionally getting out, strolling down the driveway and peeking through the front door window to see if baby Weston was awake. He said he finished his call, entered his home at 8:10 a.m. and found Amanda lying face down on the floor. He thought she was sick or unconscious. He called emergency services at 8:22 a.m. It took him 12 minutes to make the call. In an emergency situation, 12 minutes is a long time. He repeatedly said he just thought something had gone wrong with the pregnancy, that maybe his wife had gotten dizzy and fell. Did he not notice after 12 minutes that there was brain matter about 5 feet away from her body? Emergency room Dr. Scott Floyd testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, leaving him to believe that the gunshot to her head had occurred about a couple hours earlier, but those transcripts were not made public. Davy was asked if he had called anyone else. He said that after he called 911, he called his father. Defense attorneys did not cross-examine Davy Blackburn. Authorities corroborated his story with surveillance footage from the gym, and he was not among the suspects. An autopsy conducted November 12th showed the woman suffered a gunshot wound to the back of her head. She also had a gunshot wound to the lower left arm that went to her biceps, and a through-and-through gunshot wound that went in and out of her upper back. There were also multiple scratches on the left cheek, a split lip, and a knocked-out lower tooth. The above injuries indicated a possible struggle between Amanda and her attacker. A thorough investigation was launched. CCTV footage from nearby streets was examined, and neighbors and family acquaintances were interviewed. For example, a neighbor reported hearing gunshots about 35 minutes after Davy left the house. Another neighbor, Reginald Townsell, said their street was not the type of neighborhood where a shooting could occur, and that the Blackburns didn't deserve this. The neighbors were shocked, as everyone thought the Blackburn family were wonderful and truly loving people. Based on Amanda's injuries and the missing bank cards and MacBook bag, the initial theory was robbery. During the investigation, police determined that on the morning of November 10, 2015, several emergency calls were made reporting a home invasion at separate homes near Blackburn's home. Around 5:20 a.m., one woman reported waking up to find her cell phone, laptop, purse, and keys missing from her apartment. Her car was also gone from the parking lot. The sliding glass door to her apartment was open, she said. 3 hours later, another woman reported a burglary at a home on Sunnyfield Court. Someone broke through the patio screen and got inside. According to police, 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink women's sweater, a remote control, a bag of oranges and bedding were missing from the home. 5 minutes after that, someone else from Sunnyfield Court called the emergency services. It was Davy Blackburn. Lieutenant Richard Riedel of the Indianapolis Police Department said police are looking for a connection between the homicide and other burglaries that occurred in the same neighborhood in the morning. Police have not released details about the investigation, honoring the secrecy of the investigation, but after getting hold of images of possible suspects from one of the burglarized homes, they released them asking the public to identify and help the investigation. Davy Blackburn was confident that the police department was doing everything they could to catch his wife's perpetrator. Investigators assured that they had never seen such part of Blanche given to them to continue the investigation, so they were confident that very soon some of these promising leads would help find a person or persons responsible. The key clues used to track down the 3 suspects were a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. The receipt and sweater were found in the stolen Chrysler Sebring, which was used during the robberies. Authorities recovered the vehicle November 11th near the Blackburns' home. The debit card listed on the receipt matched the stolen card of Amanda Blackburn. Investigators obtained a warrant to examine the ATM camera and found video showing the driver covering his face with the stolen pink sweater. Police relied on DNA testing, surveillance footage, and witnesses to identify the suspects. DNA testing from the sweater confirmed that Jalen Watson was one of the suspects. Watson's identification was the first major breakthrough in the case. The affidavit said cell phone records were obtained because Watson's number was in the database because of his parole for another burglary. Diana Gordon's cell phone records were also obtained. These records showed that Watson's and Gordon's cell phones were in the area when the crime was committed. The phone records also indicated that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. Larry Taylor was the final piece of the puzzle. By examining surveillance footage in the area, police were able to identify Taylor's phone number and trace his address. In the days that followed, reports also surfaced that a gun had been found near the Blackburn home. Police said a man delivered the gun to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming to have found it outside the couple's home. The gun was analyzed by crime lab technicians. After 2 weeks of investigation and detective work, police charged 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old Jalen Watson with the murder of Amanda Blackburn. A third burglary suspect, 24-year-old Diana Gordon, was arrested for a parole violation, but was not charged with a felony because he did not enter the Blackburn home. After receiving crime lab results, a gun found near the victim's home was proven to be the weapon of the crime. All 3 assailants were apprehended.
When questioned, Larry Taylor said that he shot the woman twice somewhere because she jumped on him and he didn't want her to scratch him. Then, when she fell, he leaned over her body and shot her in the back of the head and bent over her watching her bleed to death. A criminal trio came to rob the Blackburn house. They just wanted some money. So they headed to the Blackburn home, where the husband had left the front door unlocked when he left for the gym. Inside, they confronted Amanda to keep her out of the way. Taylor hit her with a gun. Watson and Gordon saw the woman and wanted to leave. They already had the bank cards they had stolen earlier, so they went looking for an ATM. They tried unsuccessfully to get $500 from one ATM, but got $400 from another. This is where they got caught on CCTV. They then drove back to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor. In their absence, a struggle ensued in the house. Amanda came to her senses after being hit and lunged at the perpetrator, at which point he tackled the woman. Afterward, Taylor put the stolen debit cards in the car of accomplices who had gone to an ATM at the time of the crime, and when they returned, he admitted to shooting Amanda. According to court documents, The Blackburn home was the third target of the November 10th attack by Taylor, Watson, and Gordon. In the first break-in, the thieves stole a laptop, wallet, and car while the resident was asleep. While inside the home, they discovered they were being recorded by a video camera, but simply moved on. The group drove up to another home, broke in through a patio window and stole 4 televisions, a laptop, jewelry, a bag of oranges, and a pink sweater that eventually helped police identify them, the affidavit said. Court documents outlined the evidence police collected against the suspects. The most important piece of evidence: Watson's DNA was found on a pink sweater taken during the second burglary, which was then used to cover his face from a surveillance camera as he tried to withdraw cash using Amanda Blackburn's bank card. Watson and Gordon cooperated with the investigation in return for a reduced sentence.
Larry Taylor waived his right to remain silent and admitted to being near the scene of the burglary. He said he may have stopped in the Blackburn neighborhood, but claimed he was so confused he couldn't remember. Formal charges were filed by the county prosecutor. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including the very same felony, after knowingly and willfully killing Amanda Blackburn. Jalen Watson is charged with a felony. Both he and Taylor face multiple charges of burglary, robbery, and theft. Diana Gordon, who was in custody due to a parole violation, also faces burglary charges. There was a 4th person who knew about the robberies, burglaries, and other crimes but did not participate in them. He was questioned and released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit worked with the gang unit and federal marshals to arrest Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height praised the cooperation that led to the arrest. The detectives worked tirelessly, all day long without sleep, to solve the murders in the city. With the assistance of Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served. Because the victim was pregnant, prosecutors said they would consider filing additional charges related to the fetus. Even though the woman's underwear was removed and her shirt was pulled up, they said there was no evidence to support the rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial took place in December 2021, but the trial was over in seconds when it was discovered that one of the jurors had shared information about the case with other jurors. The disclosure interrupted the trial. A mistrial was declared. The final trial was held in October 2022. Subsequent jury selection was more thorough. The county drew more than 100 people as possible jurors. Each had to fill out a 16-page questionnaire so attorneys could assess whether they could reach a fair verdict. Larry Joe Taylor was sentenced to 86 years in the Indiana State Correctional Institution for the murder of Amanda Blackburn and for additional charges related to a burglary from a home. Diana Gordon and Jalen Watson agreed to plea agreements and testified against Larry Taylor at trial. Both received sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Jalen Watson and Larry Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. A murder conviction in Indiana can send a person to prison for 45 to 60 years, and some are punishable by life in prison or the death penalty. Prosecutors filed a motion to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence, which means he could face an additional 20 years in prison because Amanda Blackburn was pregnant when he allegedly massacred her. Davy Blackburn, the church's pastor, said he is relieved that those responsible for killing his wife have been caught and will not be able to harm anyone else. Amanda Blackburn's death has resonated with thousands of people, including the state's chief executive. Her funeral at a Christian church was attended by more than 2,000 people. Among them was Governor Mike Pence. Resonant Church has set up a donation page to help pay for Amanda Blackburn's funeral and medical expenses. Davy Blackburn said he is hopeful for a judicial system that will certainly show wisdom to the people who have caused his family so much pain. Incredibly, he has repeatedly reported that he has decided to forgive Amanda's killers. "I was very relieved to learn of the arrest," he told reporters. "Although everything inside me wants to hate, be angry, and despair, I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope." Amanda Blackburn's case has generated significant interest across the country, with coverage appearing in national and international media. Davy Blackburn changed his role from that of an unhappy husband to that of a popular blogger. He began to capitalize on his tragedy and record multiple podcasts and videos, which he called Nothing Wasted. He began appearing on TV stations and speaking out about his wife's death, repeating over and over the pain he had experienced and recounting the tragedy. But he didn't seem unhappy. Amanda's death made Davy not only famous, but rich. The fact that he received an insurance payout after his wife's death does suggest that he didn't accidentally forget to lock the door that day on November 10th, 2015. Didn't he? What do you guys think? On March 2nd, 2016, Davy Blackburn bought a new 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom home with a pool. He then sold the very house where Amanda was murdered. For an unhappy husband who lost his beloved, Davy was pretty happy. In July 2016, he posted a photo of his new home on his blog and captioned it, "How happy I am to have pool parties in my new home." Now Davy Blackburn is happy in his new marriage. Nothing is wasted serendipity. Turn your eyes to Jesus, gaze upon his marvelous countenance, and earthly things become strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.